This paper by Harvey Lovewell, presented at the Australia and New Zealand Masonic Research Council Conference in Dunedin in 2022, explores the requirement of belief in a supreme being for Masonic membership. It delves into historical and contemporary perspectives on this belief, examining its implications within Freemasonry's constitution and practices. The paper challenges traditional views, suggesting a re-evaluation of the role of religious belief in Masonic membership, and highlighting the evolving societal beliefs. It also addresses the philosophical and moral aspects of belief, urging consideration of inclusivity and moral compass over strict religious adherence. As it is quite a lengthy work, it will be presented in 2 parts. Thanks to Brother Lovewell for providing this essay and for his permission to reproduce it here.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's presentation From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore.
This paper looks at the condition within our constitutions for the belief in a supreme being as a requirement for membership of our order. Why do we ask this? Is it to demand that a man who has a high moral compass should be welcomed? Are we saying that only a belief in a supreme being can give this man a high moral compass? History has shown that men with no morality who are outright evil have believed in a supreme being. I ask the question, should Freemasonry's use of volumes of sacred law also be reconsidered? I claim this is not a discussion of religion, but a discussion of the concept of belief, including an analysis of some parts of Freemasonry's constitution and how it affects Freemasonry. I ask the questions that I think we, as a fraternity, should be trying to answer. I acknowledge the controversial nature of the subject, but claim that is the role of our organization. I also acknowledge that there are constraints on the length of this paper, so in-depth discussion has been avoided.
If you would be a real seeker after truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt, as far as possible, all things.
Truth is a shining goddess, always veiled, always distant, never wholly approachable, but worthy of all the devotion of which the human spirit is capable.
Supreme Being. So what then are we able to define as a supreme being? The concept of a supreme being starts with a sense that something must be responsible for the world around us. The idea of a creator is key, and this creator requires worship, i.e., an acknowledgement of human dependence on and love for the creator. It is this combination of creator and worship that drives most religious traditions to monotheism. Even in Hinduism, with many gods and goddesses, there is still an emphasis on the underlying unity of the many, in the one Brahma, the reality and truth as seen by Hindus.
Humans like to attribute causes to events and attempt to understand what is taking place around them. This is why individuals have been using religious ceremonies for centuries to invoke the will of the gods, because they believed the gods controlled certain elements of the natural world, e.g., the weather.
Someday, when the cloud of prejudice has been dispelled by the searchlight of truth, the world will honor Masonry for its service to freedom of thought and the liberty of faith. No part of its history has been more noble, no principle of its teaching has been more precious than its age-long demand for the right and duty of every soul to seek that light by which no man was ever injured, and that truth that makes man free.
So where to stand? The idea of a supreme being and its discussion fill many thousands of volumes of deep analysis, beyond the scope of this paper, but to touch on it, I must.
Supreme beings are divinities whose nature reveals a unique quality of being, generally a transcendent spiritual power, in a culture's religious system.
Various cultures have their idea of a supreme being, and a belief in such is strongly rooted in their culture. Tribes on all continents have their versions. However, what we know of what is termed major religions can be shown by this diagram. They all end up with the same God. This diagram is meant to show that the common truth behind all world religions is the idea that everyone is God. In the outer sections of the circle, we have the outer mysteries of religion, which are the rules, the rituals, and the regulations. In the inner part of the circle is depicted the mystical heart of each religion, the mystical practices and disciplines designed to bring people into union with God. Towards the center we find God, the ultimate truth and ground of all beings. Though God is given different names, the assertion here is that all the different labels are referring to the same thing. There are so many versions and subversions, surely they cannot all be a unique God. No wonder the men writing the Ten Commandments put in the one which said, "There shall not be any other gods before me." Remember that Moses' 10 Commandments were like the rules in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and Moses' life had been as the son of a pharaoh. Here is another concept of God. This one is also man-made.
What is going to be created will effectively be a god. It's not a god in the sense that it makes lightning or causes hurricanes. But if there is something 1 billion times smarter than the smartest human, what else are you going to call it? And this time, you will be able to talk to God, literally, and know that it's listening.
Words. Words and language are the tools of philosophers. Wittgenstein, an influential Austrian philosopher, put forward what some people considered to be a radical thesis. He said,
"The problems of philosophers arise in consequence of fundamental errors in the use of language."
Language is the instrument we use in the formation and communication of ideas, and is therefore of central importance to philosophy. The difficulty is that when you transmit a thought, you use words that are clear to you, but which may not hold the same meaning for your listener. Your listener tends to understand your words in his terms of reference, not yours, and distortion creeps in. Words create ideas that we can or cannot accept. Words govern ideas, and words create our mental pictures. Moral compass. What then is our moral compass? The dictionary defines a moral compass as a person's ability to judge what is right and wrong and act accordingly. Some people also define it as a set of values that guide our decision-making, affect our actions, and define us as a person. In essence, a moral compass is just as its name suggests. In Freemasonry, we often refer to the symbology of the compass as setting bounds on our behavior. Evidence suggests that people who have a healthy, functioning moral compass are more grounded, focused, content with life, and productive. They also seem to have a more nurturing and positive relationship with people around them and their environment. They minimize harm to this world and maximize their contributions. Does this sound like the description of the sort of man we would like to welcome into Freemasonry, even if he does not believe in a deity? Belief. I will now look at belief. Belief has been thought to have an aim, that aim towards truth and knowledge. How many people still believe that the great architect of the universe is an old man with a beard, wearing flowing robes and sitting on a throne up in the sky? Belief, the noun, and believe, the verb, are words that are sometimes used in error and out of context. I have used the word belief several times so far. So, what then is a belief? What is the difference between believe and belief? Believe is a verb that is simply used for accepting the truth. Belief is a noun that is generally used for acceptance or confidence in the truth, faith or trust. When you want to understand something, that which appears to be simple can get complicated. We could say that belief is an assumed truth.
Belief is the state of mind in which a person thinks something to be the case, with or without there being empirical evidence to prove that something is the case with factual certainty.
When you study the root of the word belief, you gain a greater understanding of its depth and meaning. The true definition of belief will show you why our beliefs are so powerful. The word belief comes from two words, be and lief. Be comes from being, which is a state of existence. To be is to live. The second word, lief, comes from the Indo-European word lief, which means love. So, when you put them together, it changes the entire idea of the word belief. Belief then means to be in love with. Would you believe that?
Contemporary analytic philosophers of mind generally use the term belief to refer to the attitude we have, roughly, whenever we take something to be the case or regard it as true. To believe something in this sense needn't involve actively reflecting on it.
Therefore, beliefs are not necessarily what is true or factual in the real world. The power of each belief comes only from the individual believer. So why, then, should we, as regular Freemasons, demand a belief in a supreme being? As can be seen from the above, belief is a relative state of consciousness that is abstract, whereas a high moral compass is a tangible, measurable trait. So what, then, is a fact? A fact is the representation of reality as it is. If this is so, then what is the truth? Truth is what is believed to be a fact by a person. That means you can believe whatever you want to believe. If you believe it to be true, it will be true for you and for your life. We are influenced by many factors that ripple through our minds as our beliefs form, evolve, and may eventually change.
To those searching for truth, not the truth of dogma and darkness, but the truth brought by reason, search, examination, and inquiry, discipline is required. For faith, as well-intentioned as it may be, must be built on facts, not fiction. Faith in fiction is a damnable false hope.
A belief is an internal thought or memory which exists in one's mind. Most people accept that for a belief to be knowledge, it must, at least, be true and justified. Broadly speaking, knowledge is objective truth, while belief is subjective truth. Religion. This then brings me to look at religion. Is there just one definition of religion? There is not. Philosophers do not agree, and in research there are many different definitions. True, but all seem to hinge on the superhuman belief, organized ritual, and more. Here is one example from Clifford Geertz, an expert on cultural symbols.
The system of symbols which acts to establish powerful, pervasive and long-lasting moods and motivations in men by formulating conceptions of a general order of existence, and clothing these conceptions with such an aura of factuality that the moods and motivations seem uniquely realistic.
Freud stated that religion is comparable to infantile neurosis. Religion can be understood as religare, to rebind, and it also means union. Union with divinity. Nobel laureate and philosopher Bertrand Russell said,
"Men are born ignorant, not stupid. They become stupid by education."
Most religious people think their morality comes from their religion. However, studies have shown that people often change what they say God wants with what they think is right. They manipulate their religious belief to suit their moral compass. And deeply religious people often wonder how atheists can have any morality at all. Atheists do have a moral compass that may differ from that of a religious person. Every Mason is a sincere seeker of light, of all light that allows him to advance in his search for truth. A good Mason must be tolerant of the freedom of thought of all laymen. He must be tolerant of the beliefs and dogmas of the profane world. He, therefore, has a highly developed moral compass. Is this not what our order deserves in its members? Ideology. Ideology refers to a set of beliefs and doctrines that back a certain social institutions or an organization. Personal ideology is an individual's philosophy of how life should be and of what forces influence human living. A person's ideology will have a direct bearing on their moral compass. We then can describe religion as a collection of ideas, practices, values, and stories that are all embedded in cultures and not separable from them. Just as a religion cannot be understood in isolation from its cultural, including political, contexts, it is impossible to understand a culture without considering its religious dimensions. In the same way that race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, and socio-economic class are always factors in cultural interpretation and understanding, so too is religion. There are very fundamental differences between philosophy and ideology. Ideology refers to a set of beliefs and doctrines that back a certain social institution or an organization, as above, and, in other words, ideology is aimed at changing the world, whereas philosophy is aimed at seeking the truth. Do any of these definitions fit Freemasonry? Philosophy. Philosophy is where I would place the true aims of Freemasonry, and where I believe they should be. As Masonic researchers, do we not say that we seek the truth of Masonic light?
Freemasonry is an institution founded on eternal reason and truth, whose deep basis is the civilization of mankind, and whose everlasting glory it is to have the immovable support of those two mighty pillars, science and morality.
This is from Bertrand Russell, taken from his lecture, Why I Am Not a Christian, given at Battersea Town Hall in 1927, and the last paragraph, What We Must Do.
A good world needs knowledge, kindliness, and courage. It does not need a regretful hankering after the past, or a fettering of the free intelligence by the words uttered long ago by ignorant men. It needs a fearless outlook and free intelligence. It needs hope for the future, not looking back all the time toward a past that is dead, which we trust will be far surpassed by the future that our intelligence can create.
In other words, do we not need men with morality, a high moral compass, as part of their creed? To answer this, let us look at our constitutions. Freemasons' constitutions. Are there any words in our constitutions that lead us to say we should have men with a high moral compass? It seems only natural that with the commissioning in the early 1700s by Deputy Grand Master John Theophilus de Saglier, a minister of religion, who was also a brilliant scientist, and James Anderson, also a minister of religion, to write a history and a set of rules to govern the new Grand Lodge of England, that they should have a leaning towards their particular religion. We must keep in mind that the society of the early 1700s, within which the genesis of Freemasonry occurred, was a far different one than that of today. London was rife with political intrigue, with a move to advance the Stuart cause. Time was still measured by the Julian calendar, with a new year being Lady Day on the 25th of March. For example, in 1717, one of the 4 founding lodges of Grand Lodge was the Rummer and Grape Lodge. It had on its books no less than 13 members who were aristocrats, approximately 20 who were members of the Royal Society, over 20 more were magistrates, almost a third were members of Parliament. Some even had military rank, including 2 general officers and at least 10 colonels. 5 of the leading members had direct blood links to the Crown. 4 were grandsons of Charles II. This was the membership of Freemasonry at that time. Could it be said that they were elitist? Changes in agriculture were heralding the Industrial Revolution. In 1717, there were 18,475 babies born and 23,446 people buried. The average life expectancy age of a gentleman was in the mid-40s, and of the poor, only half that. The figures are no doubt brought about by the huge number of children who died before the age of 5. In certain districts, the infant mortality rate reached 75% of all live births. During the 1700s, more people died in London than were baptized every year. It was only the steady flow of migrants coming to the city from rural areas that prevented London's population from declining dramatically. On top of that, there were 91 men and 18 women hanged that year, 1717. All in all, it was not a good time for your average man. This was also the time when the production and consumption of gin was at an all-time high, and no doubt assisted the rise in the early death of many. But at least it did not kill as many as did the bad water of the time. We must then view the rise of Grand Lodge Freemasonry and the rise of its membership within the history of the time. Freemasonic men were the crème de la crème of the population. Only royalty, the rich and famous, clergy and those who could afford it, like members of the Royal Society, were Freemasons. The history of Masonry, as written by Anderson and others, proved fanciful and just a figment of his imagination. Or was it supposed to be taken as an allegory? These myths were not as specifically Masonic as they first may seem. They are based upon relatively common beliefs by the people of the early 18th century about the creation and the development of mankind, and, much more important, especially for noblemen, are based on the belief about the heredity of virtue through a bloodline. The author of the 1723 Constitutions of the Freemasons held the position that they were upholding the ancient traditions passed down to them through Masonic history, its documents, and its traditions. It follows that they must have had access to earlier documents, so were rewriting the rules and regulations and not starting from the beginning. What we know as Anderson's Constitutions were based on the old Masonic manuscripts, also called the Gothic Constitutions, and on the general regulations which had been compiled first by George Payne in 1720. The full title of the 1723 edition was The Constitutions of the Freemasons, containing the history, charges, regulations, etc. of that most ancient and right worshipful fraternity for the use of the lodges. Here is an extract from the first edition of 1723 of that part headed Concerning God and Religion.
A Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law, and if he rightly understands the art, he will never be a stupid atheist nor an irreligious libertine. But though in ancient times Masons were charged in every country to be of the religion of that country or nation, whatever it was, yet 'tis now thought more expedient only to oblige them to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their particular opinions to themselves, that is, to be good men and true, or men of honor and honesty, by whatever denominations or persuasions they may be distinguished, whereby Masonry becomes the center of union, and the means of conciliating true friendship among persons that must else have remained at a perpetual distance.
I particularly like that part where it says, leaving their particular opinions to themselves. Does this part describe in detail a man of high moral compass? The expression moral compass was not used until 1824, but its definition can be seen in this part of the Constitution. At the time of the forming of the Grand Lodge in 1717, the UK had been, and was still, in a state of political and religious ferment. Anglicans made up 92% of the population, with only 3% having no religion and the remainder Catholic or Puritan. Would it not be stupid to admit to being an atheist in these times? Also, what is a libertine? A libertine is one devoid of most moral or sexual restraints, which are seen as unnecessary or undesirable, especially one who ignores or even spurns accepted morals and forms of behavior sanctified by the larger society. However, it also originally meant a free thinker or deist. Derived from the Latin libertinus, a man that was once a bondsman but who has been made free, it was metaphorically used to designate one who had been released, or who had released himself from the bonds of religious belief and become, in matters of faith, a doubter or denier. The sort of man not wanted by our fraternity of good men and true. Though, interestingly, both atheist and libertine are tarred with the same brush in this Constitution. History shows us that many could have been described as a libertine in one sense or another, who claimed also a belief in a supreme being, and were kings, popes, cardinals, bishops, politicians, priests, and some Freemasons who possessed a low or non-existent moral compass. The current UGLE constitutions accept that from 1717 the aims as stated came into being, but in listing the principal editions of the Book of Constitutions, they start at the issue which is the 6th or 7th edition of the Constitutions and dated 1815. This is, of course, after the unifying of Grand Lodges in the UK in 1813. Our brothers must, then, have felt the need to change the constitutions, which is alluded to in Section 2 below.
In view of representations which have been received, and of statements recently issued which have distorted or obscured the true objects of Freemasonry, it is once again considered necessary to emphasize certain fundamental principles of the order.
What representations, and by whom, is not known, or at least I have been unable to find out. The following states a belief principle as if it were from the beginning, and it is from the 1815 version of the Constitution. As shown above, it was not in the first or 1723 edition of the Constitutions.
A Mason is obliged by his tenure to obey the moral law, and if he rightly understand the art, he will never be a stupid atheist nor an irreligious libertine. He of all men should best understand that God seeth not as man seeth, for man looketh at the outward appearance, but God looketh to the heart. A Mason is therefore particularly bound never to act against the dictates of his conscience. Let a man's religion or mode of worship be what it may, he is not excluded from the order, provided he believe in the glorious architect of heaven and earth and practice the sacred duties of morality. Masons unite with the virtuous of every persuasion in the firm and pleasing bond of fraternal love. They are taught to view the errors of mankind with compassion and to strive by the purity of their own conduct to demonstrate the superior excellence of the faith they may profess. Thus, Masonry is the center of union between good men and true, and the happy means of conciliating friendship amongst those who must otherwise have remained at a perpetual distance.
Here we have to miss the definition of that religion in which all men agree to be good men and true, or men of honour and honesty, or one could say, of a high moral compass. It is also in these early times that the breakaway from the English way of Freemasonry by the French occurred. The Grand Orient of France was created in Paris in 1736. Its constitution was modelled on Anderson's original constitution of 1723. Changes to this constitution, Anderson's, were first made in England regarding a belief in a supreme being or the great architect of the universe and the placing of the Bible on the altar. The Bible is not mentioned in Masonic rituals until 1724, and it was in 1760 that Preston moved that it be considered as one of the great lights of Freemasonry. At this time, the French stayed with the original constitution. There was no problem with this, and French Masons were not considered godless or atheists. To be atheistic, the French would have had to state, "There is no God," and they did not say this. They did say, "Masonry excludes no one on account of his beliefs." It is interesting to note that the proposer of the idea to suppress the great architect of the universe was a Protestant clergyman, and he stated,
"In suppressing the formula respecting the great architect of the universe, we did not mean to replace it by a materialistic formula. None among us, in proposing this suppression, thought of professing atheism or materialism, and we declare formally and emphatically that we had no other end in view than to proclaim absolute liberty of conscience."
I do not want to be considered as one who thinks that it is wrong for a man to hold a belief in a deity, but as one who seeks to hold a belief that there are many good men and true who do not hold the same belief as other Freemasons, but should also be welcome within our fold, I will again quote from Anderson's Constitutions of 1723.
Yet it is now thought more expedient only to oblige them to that religion in which all men agree, leaving their peculiar opinions to themselves. That is to be good men and true, men of honour and honesty, by whatever denominations or persuasions they may be distinguished.
This, then, is where the Grand Orient of France went back to after the English amended their constitutions to include the great architect of the universe. A man of high moral compass would fit into that described as making a good Mason. For a deep dive into the history, philosophy, and traditions of Freemasonry, subscribe to From the Quarries. You will find hundreds of lectures, presentations, shorts, and other Masonic works written by Freemasons for Freemasons. Visit FromTheQuarries.com or YouTube at From the Quarries.